In some respects today, I represent the Board of Trustees. I've talked to most of them. And they send their support, their sorrow, their grief to each one of you. And they also were quick to point out they want to support and commend John Fahey and his staff for the wonderful way in which they've handled this tragedy. Board shares our grieving, our pain, our loss of family. They also are deeply saddened by the loss of our teachers and students. These teachers and students made a huge contribution to our program. We're seeing contributions flow into the society in the names of all those who were lost. And I got one just this morning, and I'll be brief. The D.C. Commission on Arts and Humanities is offering assistance in the grief healing process to our 3 schools, and they will send a trained artist to work with students to help them express their feelings and create an artistic work at each school in the memory of their classmates and teachers. And I think that was a very thoughtful thing for them to do. And a wonderful lady named Dorothy McSweeney is part of that process. And I don't know whether Dorothy made it through the crowd or not. There she is. She's back there. Thank you, Dorothy. We have very little experience with the loss of a staff member on assignment. As a matter of fact, there are very few people in this room who probably even remember the last time we lost a staff member, which was about 40 years ago. I think around 1958 in the fall. A seaplane carrying George Long went down on its way from Lisbon to Madeira. And until last Tuesday, we had been spared. But we've certainly paid the price. Last Tuesday, I was in San Juan, Puerto Rico, to celebrate the completion of our Puerto Rico endowment, $1 million. It was to be a joyous occasion. And it was until I turned the television on Tuesday morning, and of course, like all of us, learned of the tragedy. Then I had to go to the St. John's School, where one of our wonderful teachers works, and talk to them. It's a great school. As a matter of fact, one of their students was runner-up in our geography bee a couple of years back. But what do you say to those students? And ironically, said the same thing I said to every school. It is more important today than ever to understand the world, different cultures, different religions, different peoples. And that's what Joe and Ann were all about. It was some 15 years ago, maybe a year or two longer, when Joe first came here as an intern. He was fresh out of college, had a lot of ideas. He had a master's degree in geography. And he stayed here. And he and Susan Monroe were the geography education program. Little did they know that they would change education in America. Little did Joe know that he would personally reach and touch 3,000 teachers, who in turn have fanned out across this country and reached 150,000 teachers, who in turn every year teach at least 20 students. So we're looking at least 3 million people, students, that Joe reaches every year. Joe, as was pointed out by John, had many traits. One, he was precise. And I suspect wherever he is today, he's looking down with great glee at the fact that we started 7 minutes and 32 seconds late today. He was candid, some say almost to a fault. And if you've been on the other end of the candor, you can understand that. He was frugal. Joe didn't like to spend any more money than he had to. His associates soon learned that, because if they came to him with a request for something that he considered frivolous, he would say, "Oh, and what's your account number?" Joe had a vision. And when he sensed we needed leadership, he lobbied for, won, and managed the leadership initiative. When he sensed we weren't reaching the urban areas, he did the same thing. And we have our urban workshops, and now a couple of urban alliances. Joe also mentored and tutored students. He liked to do that. And he had one group that just couldn't seem to learn the multiplication tables. And I suspect, in a moment of weakness, Joe said to these students, "I'll tell you what I'll do. If all of you learn the multiplication tables perfectly, I'll let you do anything you want with my hair." Fantastic incentive. And sure enough, they all learned their multiplication table. And Joe endured the layering and spiking of that beautiful head of hair. And when he came into the office, a friend stopped by and said, "Joe, what have you done?" He said, "Oh, it's just a Southern thing." As I said earlier, he craved perfection. In institute after institute, teacher after teacher, perfection became routine. Even graduation was perfection. And that was difficult for him because I was usually involved. And I can remember one of the first, maybe the very first, Joe had everything lined up. I was to give a short welcoming address. Then the teachers would come down to the music of pomp and circumstance. Joe would give them all a hug. I'd give them a diploma. And every one of them was crying. Every one of them got tears on my jacket was wet. Every one of them said, "You've changed my life forever." I was beginning to feel like a religious leader. And I was getting embarrassed. And I vowed I would never go to graduation again. Of course I did. But it was a very emotional time. But he did change their life. He changed their life forever. I dare say every one of the teachers who are still teaching across this nation are thinking of Joe Ferguson. He was so precise that at the end of one graduation, he was sitting squirming in his chair, and I knew something was going wrong. And Bob Dooley was giving the final spiritual message. And he had about 5 pages in his hand. And he went up to the podium, and he looked at the teachers and addressed them. And he turned around and addressed Joe. And Joe went, and Bob said, and I quote, "Please join us in the hall for refreshments." Later that night, Joe was the first, of course, to hit the dance floor. But then he saw Bob Dooley across the room, And he ran over to Bob and said, "Bob, that was the best speech I ever heard you give."